Hi, my name is Adanna, and I will be presenting topic 6.2, State Expansion. Imperialism in Africa. For most of the 1800s, the European presence in Africa was restricted to trading posts. In the second half of the 1800s, however, they expanded their presence. The British seized control of Egypt from the Ottoman Empire in 1882. The British had a stronghold in West Africa, which included Sierra Leone, which was a home for freed slaves, Gambia, which was used as a base to stop the export of slaves in the region, Lagos, which was a crown colony and a base for the annexation of much of Nigeria, and Ghana, which was acquired in stages. The French also had a presence in Africa. The French drove the Ottomans out of Algeria in 1830, and by 1870, Algeria became a settler colony. The French also established trading posts in Guinea, Ivory Coast, and Niger to compete with British colonies. European scramble for Africa. At the Berlin Conference, European powers met to provide for the orderly colonization of Africa. No Africans were present at the meeting. The borders drawn divided unified societies and united rival groups in Africa. In South Africa, the British replaced the Dutch in Cape Colony during the Napoleonic Wars. The British and the Afrikaners fought over land during the Boer Wars. The British eventually drove the Afrikaners and Africans into segregated concentration camps, where many died due to poor conditions. In the Congo, King Leopold invaded and owned the colony personally. He made use of colonial officials to coerce the Congolese people into harvesting ivory and rubber. These officials used tactics such as severing hands to force people to work. As many as 8 million died. In 1908, Belgium officially took over control and conditions improved. By 1900, the only unclaimed African countries were Abyssinia, which is present-day Ethiopia, and Liberia, which was formed by former slaves from the U.S. Liberia, however, was still dependent on the U.S. Italy tried and failed to conquer Abyssinia in 1895. Imperialism in South Asia. Portugal, France, and England competed for control of India's spice, gems, and trade with regions to the east. Portugal established Goa, a trading post, in the early 16th century, but failed to extend control further inland. France also established trading posts in the 17th century, but they were pushed out of India by Britain following the 7 Years' War. England controlled the entire Indian subcontinent using the East India Company. As this company moved further inland, they began to recruit Indian soldiers called sepoys. The image on the right is the East India Company's coat of arms circa 1700s. Imperialism in East Asia. Europe instituted spheres of influence within China, which were areas over which they had exclusive trading rights and access to natural resources. Internal problems within the Qing government made it easier for foreign countries to exert influence over China's economy. From 1899 to 1901, an anti-imperialist group called the Boxers targeted Chinese Christians and Western missionaries with the support of Empress Dowager Cixi, who ordered for all foreigners to be killed in 1900. However, most who died were Chinese Christians, not foreigners. The rebellion completely humiliated the Empress and the Qing court. Japan rapidly industrialized during the Meiji Restoration. Afterwards, they looked outward for territory. Through a colonization society, Japanese leaders planned to establish colonies in Mexico and Latin America. Japan's empire in East Asia included parts of China, Korea, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands. This empire lasted from the 1890s until the end of World War II. The picture on the right is a painting of the Boxer Rebellion within China. Imperialism in Southeast Asia. In 1641, the Dutch seized control of the Spice Islands and set up the Dutch East India Company, or VOC. Corruption caused the company to bankrupt, and the Dutch government took over. The plantations produced tea, rubber, and sugar. France controlled Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, which were collectively known as the French Indochina. The plantations produced rubber. Britain controlled all of the Malay Peninsula, Burma, and northern Borneo. The British promoted the planting of cash crops like pepper and rubber. Siam escaped the clutches of European imperialism through diplomatic relations with Britain and France. The government instituted a series of modernizing reforms, such as building railroads and setting up Western-style schools. The image to the right is the logo of the Amsterdam Chamber of VOC. Australia and New Zealand. Britain established Australia as a penal colony. In 1788, the first convicts and settlers arrived. The east coast was named New South Wales. In the 1820s, Britain took possession of the entire continent of Australia. The discoveries of copper and gold helped spur growth in Australia. When Britain annexed New Zealand in 1839, it was made part of New South Wales. However, in 1841, New Zealand became a separate colony following the Treaty of Waitangi. This treaty guaranteed that the rights of the Maori inhabitants would be protected by Britain. However, open war still broke out between the Maori inhabitants and the settlers. Sheep grazing and dairy farming were the base for New Zealand's economy. The image on the right is an artist's depiction of the discovery of Australia. U.S. imperialism in Latin America and the Pacific. During the 19th century, the U.S. took land from indigenous people. The most notorious instance of this was the Trail of Tears. The Monroe Doctrine, created by President James Monroe, stated that European nations shouldn't interfere in the affairs of countries in the Western Hemisphere. White Americans believed in manifest destiny, which was a widely held cultural belief that America was destined by God to spread across the entire North American continent. They followed through with this plan by buying Alaska from Russia in 1867. The U.S. also completed the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869. This allowed settlers to expand west. As these white settlers expanded, Native Americans were forced onto reservations. In 1893, the western frontier was officially declared closed. Economic prosperity and feelings of nationalism drove desires for territorial conquest overseas. Hawaii became a U.S. territory in 1900, and following a U.S. victory in the Spanish-American War in 1898, Guam, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines came under U.S. control. The 1904 Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine said that if countries in Latin America demonstrated instability, the U.S. would intervene. Russian expansion. Catherine the Great expanded the Russian Empire during her reign. She annexed about half of Poland and territory from the Ottoman Empire. Alexander I annexed Finland, Moldova, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and part of Armenia. Beginning in the 1740s, Russian merchants sponsored voyages to Alaska. In 1808, the Russian-American Company established headquarters in Novo-Arkhanghelsk. They explored the west coast of North America. In 1811, they settled at Fort Ross, California. They left Fort Ross in 1839 and sold Alaska to the U.S. in 1867. The Great Game was a rivalry between Russia and Britain as the two competed for dominance of Afghanistan. Russia succeeded in annexing lands in China, most notably parts of Manchuria. The image on the right is a map of Russia's territorial acquisitions. Effects of state expansion. Economic. Under imperialist rule, native industries were destroyed. Reliance on cash crops introduced by imperial powers often left colonies vulnerable to natural disasters and volatile markets. Those countries still feel the effects today. The imperialist nations benefited from the extraction of minerals from colonies. Cultural and social. Europeans pressured colonies into accepting Western culture and social practices. This pressure forced colonial people to reevaluate and change their traditions. Political. European nations disrupted traditional political units and united rival people under one government. Ethnic conflicts in former colonial holdings, such as Rwanda and Nigeria, are an effect of those policies. Imperialism also contributed to tension among European powers. The culmination of this tension among imperial powers was one of the main causes of World War I and other territorial conflicts. On the right is a cartoon depicting imperial powers taking land. This concludes my presentation on topic 6.2, State Expansion. Thanks for watching and good luck on the AP exam.